Hey everybody, it's Alex, and welcome back to That Trippi Show. The more astute of you might notice, Joe is not reading the intro today. He's on the road today as well. He'll be back next week, hopefully with some good news to share. But don't worry, nothing fishy going on. Our guest today is someone many of you have been asking to hear from for a while, and I think this will be a whale of a show, a really fun show. Simon Rosenberg rejoins us. Simon, welcome back, brother.
Great to be here, Alex.
You know, Simon, I think the tweet I see most often from you, and honestly, I know you listen to our show, you hear Joe talking all the time. You like to say it's a new bluer election.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have seen that tweet from you a hell of a lot lately.
Yeah.
And it does feel like we're still in that kind of optimistic zone right now. And I wanted to just let you get into that. And why should we be optimistic? Is that still real?
Yeah, look, on the last day that Joe Biden was in the race, we were down 3 to 4 points and trailing in the battleground states. And today, you know, we're up. Kamala Harris is up by 3, 4 points nationally. She's in better shape in the battlegrounds than Trump. Our Senate polling, I think if you could have given the current Senate polling to Chuck Schumer 18 months ago, he would have said, no way, it won't be as good as this. I mean, they weren't able to make any of these battleground states competitive. You know, they are, Montana's going to be a dogfight. We're still up in Ohio. I mean, we're sort of in almost best case scenario in the Senate, as well as doing well in the presidential. And then in the House races, I mean, there isn't as much House polling.
It is weird. There has not been that much House polling.
Yeah, because there's been a lot of national polling. I mean, there have been a lot of polls, and I think the money's getting spent because the drama has been in the presidential race. I mean, it's been a serendipitous, wild, crazy few months, right? It's really where the drama's been. So I'm not surprised. But in the House races, we don't have a lot of data, but the data that we have shows us doing well in places we need to do well, in just a rash of California polls showing many of our candidates actually ahead in races where there are Republican incumbents. And, even if you're down a point or two to an incumbent at this point, that's a good poll. Being up against an incumbent is a really good poll. And so, I think we are in good shape, but the way I like to describe it is that we're winning the election, but we haven't won it yet, right? We have to now go out and win. And I think in terms of which party and which is going to be more likely to close strong and move the election a little bit closer towards them, it's us, right? We have a fundraising advantage that's significant. We have a volunteer advantage that's significant. We have a enthusiasm advantage that's significant. We have crowd size advantage, which is really significant, right? And meaningful to the other guy. And, and we're unified and they're divided and all these things that for those of us in the business, right, what we're looking at is our team is stronger. We've got a better ticket. We should be able to close out these next 40 days in a way. It's much more likely that we move the election towards us than they move it towards them. And we're already a little bit ahead. So I feel, I'd much rather be us than them right now. I'm optimistic about where we are, but, we still have a lot of election left and we need to keep the pedal to the metal.
I think the way you put it in either, as we're recording this, I think yesterday's Hopium, and for our listeners, we will link to the latest Hopium Chronicles, that's Simon's Substack. It highly encouraged, recommended reading. I think the way you put it was, it's a close election, but we have a stronger and more popular team. And if you just look down the board, every one of those things applies.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things that are just, if I can go to a little bit more, few more things to give people optimism. Number one is Republicans failed to get rid of the blue dot, and we're in Nebraska. And, right now we're doing really well in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. I mean, we're clearly ahead there by a few points in all 3 states. And if we win those 3 and we win Nebraska, the blue dot, Kamala Harris is the president. That's 270 electoral college votes. The second thing is there's been this meltdown that's happening in North Carolina is deeply significant. It's making Trump's map, makes it much more less likely that he wins in North Carolina. We're already doing very well there in the polling. I mean, polling that we should be encouraged by. And it makes his map, if he loses North Carolina, there's no real map for him that gets him to 270. We also I've seen Kamala, there's been a few polling things in the last few weeks that have been meaningful. One is Kamala Harris is now regularly in positive territory on what's called faves and unfaves, as is Governor Walz. Much more popular, 10, 15 points more popular than Trump and Vance. And we were told by many commentators that we would never see a presidential candidate or a president ever in positive territory again because of polarization. And here she is, having gained enormous ground. I mean, as people have gotten to see her, her numbers keep going up. Her favorability numbers keep going up. We haven't really ever seen, anything like this. And then finally, two other things I'm tracking that just are top of mind that, we're starting to see her make significant gains on the economy, closing the gap with Trump. She was ahead in the echelon poll. She's ahead on the economy in the FT poll and other polls. She's catching up. And then finally, there is some evidence that in higher quality polls, we're seeing very good 2020 or even better numbers with African Americans and young people. And so when you put all that together, right, there's just a lot of encouraging stuff we're looking at. There is not a lot of encouraging stuff they're looking at right now.
So, Simon, I do want to drill into basically all of those points, but one thing that bears repeating that Joe and I discussed last week, and we've seen this over time, those favorability numbers and questions under the hood, like who do you trust more on the economy? Things like that are important because you will eventually see them a couple weeks down the road starting to show up in people's vote choices. And we've been saying that for months, and we've been seeing that for months. So it is encouraging that those numbers are continuing to edge up, especially on the economy, especially now that this week with Vice President Harris's huge economic rollout, which we'll see how much that really matters. But it was clear since really the DNC, she was talking about the opportunity economy, very concrete things to reduce the cost of living, make it easier for people to do things like own houses, have kids. That seems like it's really resonating. So I wanted your take on kind of what's going on with the economy underneath.
Yeah, listen, there's no question that the vice president's team, look, this is a miraculous campaign, right? I mean, the degree of difficulty of what they've had to pull off is the highest that anybody's had to deal with in modern times. And they're doing so with very successfully and without any major errors, right? It's been kind of incredible. We all make mistakes except the Harris campaign, I guess, but one of the big jobs they had, and this is something we've been talking about, that I've talked to Joe about, that we've all talked about in the family, which is we had to close the gap in the economy. The economy is either the number one, number two issue for voters. And we could have a 3-hour debate about why Biden didn't do better. But the reality is, whatever you believed, it was critical for her to win, for her to close the gap. And they have. And this is really important. And I think it's coming from a couple things. I think one is her frame around, I want people not just to get by, but to get ahead, is incredible. I think it's one of the best simple kind of phrases or narratives since I've been in the business. I think it's so powerful, so simple, it's so easy to say, and it's so intrinsically about what the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris are about. It's a version of the opportunity economy, right? It's a phrase that describes her economic approach. It's been my belief, and I even talked about this on shows with you guys, that Joe Biden during 2020, that the attacks on us to shut down Democrats had an impact. And even though Biden won the election, he was in kind of a big hole on the economy when he became president. Mm-hmm. And I think we got on the other side of opportunity for a lot of voters, particularly younger voters, younger men, Hispanic, Black men. And Kamala is doing a very important thing, which she's putting us back on the right side of opportunity, which I think is so critical, particularly for young people at the beginning of their lives, where they want to believe that their work lives, where things are going to get better for them. And so I think that's been powerful. The second thing is the economy has actually gotten a lot better in recent months, and the interest rate cut is a big deal. It's a confirmation that we're getting to the other side of this inflationary period. And while the economy has remained remarkably strong, so the economic data too is also better. Consumer confidence has gone up, right? So the stock market is booming. We're doing well. The country is doing well. We just got GDP numbers today that were amazing. I mean,
extraordinary, really.
Yeah, I mean, we are running. I mean, if I can just explain this to folks without getting too nerdy, the new numbers, which they revised backwards over the last several years, we're now running above the projections of where GDP would have been pre-pandemic, meaning that we've come around the other side of the pandemic in better shape today than the projections in 2019 and early 2020
Had there been no pandemic.
had there been
Right.
no pandemic, right? Which is crazy. I mean, we know that our GDP growth has been much faster here than any other advanced economy in the world. And the truth is, I think that once we get through the fog of the right wing noise machine, one of the things people are going to come to realize is that within the last few months, we are all living in what may be the strongest economy since the 1960s. And so, there is, but there's a hangover, right? From COVID, from the spike in inflation, the disruption that took place. It's not surprising that people were distrustful of the progress given the level of disruption that took place. None of us should have been surprised by that, right? So I think all these things are moving in a direction where Harris's team is in the process of doing something that was essential for her to win, and essential for her to even win by a comfortable margin, which is to get even or even get ahead on the economy. So this is a huge development in the race, and it should leave us optimistic here.
And then you see the contrast, right? And this has really been apparent since the debate, but if you've been paying a lot more attention, it's been happening for a while, but you see this idea of reclaiming opportunity. And then on the other side, you basically have Trump doubling down on tariffs, tripling down on tariffs, and no economists think it's a remotely good idea. It's going to jack inflation up 6-9%. And I think what really changed, I think, since the debate was the idea that the guy that was always going to get America the best deal got so roundly outmaneuvered on the debate stage that it exposed, at least from what we're seeing, a lot of that. He can say, do whatever crazy thing he wants, but at least he's got me on the economy. Well, he didn't have him on the economy. He never did. And it's pretty clear that that's starting to shine through.
Yeah, look, I mean, he was pathetic in the debate, and I'm sure it has raised significant doubts among enough people, right, to have an impact on this race. I mean, we have to realize, and I didn't say this in the beginning, but in the last 24 hours, we've had a Republican poll echelon that has had Harris up 7 points today. We had the Ipsos poll that had her up 6 points. Most of the independent media polls last week had her up 4 to 5 points. I mean, we're now seeing a series of high quality, serious polls having her up mid single digits. We've been consistently in mid single digits in some polling in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, right? We're starting to see not 2 to 3 point leads, but 5 or 6 point leads, right? Not just nationally, but also in some of the key battleground states. The Sun Belt states are much more competitive. I mean, all of those, I think, are, essentially toss-ups at this point, right? And I think some of this had to do with the debate. She really won the debate and did herself a lot of good. And he had a really crappy debate and he hurt himself. And it's really that simple. I mean, the debate changed the election, and the election has moved towards us since then. And I do think that you're right, that this idea that, hey, he's kind of crazy and, he's a felon and raped a woman in a department store dressing room and all these other things. Well, but he's still, I'm going to have a few more nickels in my pocket. Well,
Right.
The thing that is really, the thing that I wrote about today on Twitter is that we have to come to terms with, there are many things about Trump's extremism and the way that he's running, but one of them that I keep coming back to is that he's literally running on ending the global economy as it exists today that has made us prosperous. He wants to end.
You called him a Russian wrecking ball.
A Russian
I
wrecking
believe the
ball,
phrase.
right? A Russian wrecking ball. But he wants to end the global economy as we know it that has made us prosperous. He wants to end the Western alliance that has kept us safe. And he wants to end American democracy, which has kept us free. And the question is, how in the world did an American political party end up in this place, which is essentially the place that Vladimir Putin would want one of our two political parties if he wanted to destroy the United States from within. He wants to destroy the source of our prosperity, the source of our freedom, and the source of our safety. And it is really incredible that we are at this place, that the danger of Trump continues to, I think, be easily dismissed by sort of the comical, buffoonish nature of him, right? That he couldn't be so dangerous because he's kind of this goofy buffoon and this entertainer and this orange guy, and he
Right.
wears all this makeup. And yet behind it is the most dangerous politician in the history of the United States.
It's interesting you bring up that kind of importance of, I don't want to call it the world order, but a stable, global, interconnected world with trade and democracy. One of the things that we've identified, Joe and I have, along with a lot of our work, and I know you have as well, is some of the swing voters this year, especially on the economy, one of the traits they share consistently is the belief that essentially it's a good thing that like blue jeans and McDonald's are our greatest export, and America, both culturally and economically, is still a driving force for good in the world. And that contrast between that belief that it's not Reagan-esque, certainly not, but that belief between the power of what capitalism can be and the power of what our economic force can be versus what Trump wants it to be is a very clear contrast.
Yeah, look, I have often said that one of the other reasons that Kamala Harris is succeeding right now beyond expectations, and I'm sorry, I've got a little bit of a cold or something, but
No, I'm muting the cough too. You try
I
to
got
start over. Yeah.
I know it's the cough, but one of the reasons that Kamala Harris is exceeding expectations is that the party that we saw at the convention was a party that wasn't moderate or centrist or progressive or left or neo-populist or neoliberal. It was a party that was really founded on love of country and patriotism, which is a very kind of inclusive, an inclusive orientation. I mean, the Democratic Party is in such a powerful place right now, in my view, rhetorically, emotionally, policy wise. She's very grounded and connected to the struggles of everyday people. Just the fact she's put so much emphasis on housing was sort of a big chunk of the Biden agenda that never really got done. You can't do everything, right, in 4 years, which this was one thing that needed to get done. She's leaned into this incredibly aggressively, very astutely, I think. And I do think that, to your point, so the reason why that convention sounded so powerful and clean and biting, and you felt like you were listening to the best speech that every politician had ever given in their lives, with the exception of Obama, in my view. I think he gave kind of just a normal speech, but everyone else, Michelle Obama, and just go down the list of power, is because they understood the gravity of the moment, and they also were released to go speak from a place of enormous passion, love of country. That patriotism is, we're tapping into very deep and powerful things right now as a party.
Mm-hmm.
And it's appropriate because Donald Trump is a traitor. Donald Trump hates America. Donald Trump talks down America every day. He belittles our progress and our success. He tries to pit one against one another. He attacks citizens and legal permanent residents. I mean, he is literally like a Russian wrecking ball in our society. And so the contrast between our love of country and the wrecking ball that he represents is becoming more clear. I think part of what happened in that debate was we realized the emperor had no clothes. We pulled the curtain back from the wizard, right? What you just saw was this, huge, disgusting, ugly, extreme, bad guy,
Right.
rapist, fraudster, traitor, felon. And it really hurt him. And, if we are seeing continued movement, we got a bump after the debate. There's some evidence this week in some of the polls, not all of them, right, that she's gained a little bit this week too,
Well, and we'll get into that. But one of the things that I found really interesting since the debate is how both the vice president and Tim Walz have been communicating and carrying their message. I mean, they've consistently picked the right interviews. They've connected the right way. I mean, I know you had a lot to say about the Rule interview, but I mean, you go back to the Oprah interview, everyone's going to remember it for the gun line that I think cut through a lot. But I mean, Tim Walz did the Subway interview where he it's like with a TikToker where they literally talk into Metro cards, and he sang the Menards logo and talked about how important it was to save 11% by saving your receipts. Like they're communicating this message in a way that the other side cannot.
Because they're a freak show. It's like a big Star Wars bar party, on the other side. And, we're the party of, normies. And which is, not a place that we always are as Democrats, right? So I'll take it. But there was one other thing I wanted to say about the last 10 days that I think is actually important for shaping the post-debate moment. The other thing that happened is that we learned that 2 women died in Georgia due to the Trump abortion bans. And, that was a very powerful part of the Oprah event last week. Kamala Harris went to Georgia to give a speech about this. I don't think we should underestimate how important this is, because what is true now is that we know that Trump not only sexually assaulted women, but his abortion bans are killing women. And just the extraordinary levels of misogyny and hatred of women that have come out between him and Vance makes it impossible, I think, for us to look away at an essential truth in this election, which is, our sisters and moms and daughters and colleagues and classmates have become lesser than they were 2 years ago. And it will get far worse for them if these guys win. And it's why what's happening with abortion and all these other issues around reproductive freedom, these aren't women's issues. These are our issues. And the men of this country better start understanding the degree to which that our family members and our colleagues are under assault, and that we got to rally for them, right? We got to fight for them. This isn't just their fight. This is our fight too. And I think that this is also becoming, I think, deeply corrosive for Trump and Vance. It's undermining and corroding their support among marginal people in their coalition, because they've just gone so far. I mean, for J.D. Vance to believe and to have said it repeatedly, that he thinks that women who are being beaten by their husbands and hospitalized with their husbands need to stay in those marriages for the good of the children, it's beyond the pale. And I've been blown away, overwhelmed, stunned by the rank misogyny of this iteration of MAGA and the Republican Party. And I think this is also becoming one of the most powerful drivers of what's happening. Look, post Dobbs, everything changed, right? Dobbs changed everything. But I think if you were worried about the threat of these guys to women in the United States, you have far more reasons to be worried about that today than you did 2 years ago.
Well, and the other thing that I think has really evolved, I'm not going to say it's changed, but the contrast has certainly gotten stronger. It's not just these guys are assholes, don't vote for them, vote for the other, but there's a clear alternative with a positive, forward-looking vision. I mean, you remember a couple of weeks ago now in North Carolina, which is no coincidence, where Kamala unveiled the economic policy planks, where it was basically, here's how it's going to be easier to own a home, have a kid, raise kids, with real meaningful differences, which it's clear in hindsight now that the Biden team struggled to communicate how the macro gains and how those 3 big bills that were passed, how they actually affected people's bottom lines. I think it's reasonable to say that. And you're starting to see, again, all goes to Joe's theory, unified theory, that Jerome Powell very nicely confirmed the other day, of the kind of that economic lag idea, but there's something real there. And you touched very briefly on the polling earlier. I wanted to get into something there. There's one big poll that I know you had your eye on. We have too. Our friend John Della Volpe's latest IOP poll from Harvard, which is very heavily focused on 18 to 29. And what's really interesting, and I really want your take on this, but if you look at his tweet, which I think he said something like, there's not a lot of nuance in this one. If you look from March to September, it's like the gains are extraordinary. It's men plus 12, women plus 25, whites plus 17, non-college plus 18, which ultimately I think is probably going to be the difference overall in the race. And then black voters up 21. I mean, it is such a very clear, different, go back to the newer, bluer idea. It's a newer, younger, bluer election too.
Yeah, look, there have been 2 polls released just in recent days that are large sample, high quality polls of narrow slices of the electorate, young people and black voters. And what is the case in many of these national polls is that they, only poll 70, 100 of these folks when they do their polls. And the margin of error in those size samples are, 10 points,
Huge.
right? 11
Yep.
points. Yeah. So, even though we've seen this kind of, I would argue, is kind of pernicious extrapolation from many analysts about what's happening with Black, Hispanic, young voters based on these very low samples. What happened in 2022, one of the reasons that Tom Bonnier and I got the election right along with you guys, right, is that when we started looking at these high quality, large sample polls of narrower groups, they were much better for Democrats than the conventional wisdom. I did a series of Hispanic polls where we were actually ahead of 2020, and everyone told us we were going to be way below 2020. And so the question of whether we ever were in a place where we were really in trouble with African Americans, Hispanics, and young people is we don't know. But these polls suggest that many of the national polls and many of the sort of constructs of the polls and the demographic understanding behind the theory of how these polls are constructed may be dramatically undercounting the support that we're getting from young people, from African Americans, and potentially even Hispanics, meaning that there is a potentially, I in my piece yesterday that you referenced, I showed that the latest New York Times poll, which had the election even, we were plus 64 with African Americans in that poll, but in this other poll, that's much we believe is more accurate, Kamala was plus 75. I mean, that if you then make that New York Times poll plus 75 African American, Harris is ahead. The same thing was true in this Quinnipiac poll that kind of flipped some people.
I'm glad
out
you
this
got
week.
to the Q poll because it is wild.
It was a disaster. Like, I mean, that polls like that are so where the guts of them under the hood are so loony, they shouldn't be published in my view. And it was just so bad. But I mean, it had young people at plus 3 for Harris instead of plus 31, right? And the race was still even. So
that might be the single number that you can take this cycle. Okay, is African American support for Kamala going to be 85, 87, 90, 92? There's some serious question there, and we still have work to do. But there is just no way in hell that it is going to be a 3-point race with 18 to 29s. And it's not just us kind of laughing and saying, look at what's happening in the world. And this is I think the point that Trippi made last week too. But like with everything, with Dobbs, with climate, with the economy, everything adding up, there is, and then you get to plus 3, it is like beyond belief.
No, look, there's been a constant single kind of dynamic in our commentary for the last several years, which is they overestimate Republican strengths and underestimate ours.
It's as a response to 2016.
Yeah, as a response, as who knows how we got here, right? Like, it's just a reality. It's just when we have good stuff, it gets dismissed. They have one little poll here out of 1,000 that is good, and it becomes the national news story. And it is, and some of this is 2016. Some of this was Trump's overperformance in 2020. Some of this is just the cowardice of the media, frankly, because I don't think they like when they post something on Twitter to get, beat up on Twitter, by all these right-wing trolls. And so, I think that, it is to your point. I mean, what's important about all this is that a lot of the stuff you called it under the hood, right? I mean, the stuff underneath, even, I don't know if we were going to get to it, but one of the things that I found really kind of wildly encouraging was that NBC did an analysis of their poll. It wasn't in their original poll memo of the early vote. They asked about the early vote, and Bill McInturff, the Republican pollster in the NBC poll, commented on this and said that Democrats are performing so well in the early vote. Like, 51% of voters say they're going to vote before Election Day, and we're winning that vote by like 25 points. And what he said is that we're winning that vote by so much that Trump won't be able to catch up on Election Day. And as you know, Alex, a lot of what I've been doing at Hopium is really trying to create a national movement to win this election in October, to win it in
I'm glad you got here. This was going to be the next thing.
Yeah. And I think that we just have now evidence that that's actually possible, because it's how we won the midterms in 2022. What happened in the midterms is our energized, electorate, all these grassroots folks who worked their butt off and their postcards and their phone calling and everything else. We drove the early vote really hard, and we ran up the score so big in the early vote that they couldn't catch up. So I want everyone to realize that, I work with all these postcarding groups. And the way this postcarding stuff works is people write the postcards and they hold them until a certain date when they've been told to release them. And basically, all these postcards are going to be mailed between October 1st and October 15th. There is, at the minimum, it's going to be 100 million handwritten postcards, a minimum. It may actually be much more than that. We're actually canvassing all the groups that have been organizing this to try to get an actual number. But imagine that 100 million postcards, handwritten, targeted to swing voters and swing states and swing districts around the country, are going to drop on our political system in the next couple of weeks. None of that is factored into our understanding. And the reason why this early vote number, let me just put an exclamation point on this so people understand, why do we keep overperforming expectations, right? Like why has it been consistent for 2.5 years that we've overperformed, they've underperformed, Trump even underperformed in his primaries this year? One of the reasons why, in my view, is that by moving your vote to the early vote, by pushing the early vote as hard as you can, what happens is that it allows the campaigns, once you vote, you come off the vote GOTV rolls. And when you come off the GOTV rolls, the campaign can now move on to lower propensity
Put
voters.
somebody else on.
Yep. Yeah, and put them on, but people who vote less than you do. And the quicker we get to those people, the more likely it is we actually grow our vote and we get another point or two out of our electorate that is dependent, that isn't going to show up in the polling, that is dependent upon us pushing the early vote. And so the fact that we are doing so well in that NBC News poll suggests that there could be, as a reward for all of that, another point or two in all of these races that, as you know, could make the difference between us winning and losing the election. So there's just to be, look, I'm the hopium guy. I understand my job, right? But it's also, there is a lot to be encouraged by right now, not the least of which is that we have a great candidate and a campaign that's kicking ass, and they got Trump.
I think a good place for us to end today, I think, I know I retweeted, and I'm sure you did too, but a couple of days ago, our friend Ian Basson tweeted, in terms of how a message works, right? Inflation has been beaten. Unemployment is at modern lows. The stock market is at record highs. Crime has plummeted. Border crossings are at lowest point in years. More Americans have health coverage today than ever before. Research it yourself and pass it on. But that idea, look, we're getting to the point where I can't believe we're already saying this. Campaigns are really starting to think about what their closing messages are, what they are going to be hammering home to those last groups, getting more efficient to groups like the last undecided voters, low propensity voters, like you just talked about. But it seems like there is a very clear final message here. And we haven't even talked about, the Trump cognitive decline and all the negatives that we're going to see. So I think that we'd rather be us than them. You've given us a pretty convincing case.
Well, listen, all the stuff that Ian wrote is all stuff that, as you know, I've been writing about and talking about at Hopium, many of those same things. But I will say one other thing that has just been fascinating to me that I'm trying to come to understand, and is that Trump, in the last several months, and particularly it's escalated in the last several weeks, has offered his supporters the ability to buy his cryptocurrency, buy his Bibles, buy a book, a commemorative book, buy a coin that he just launched a few days ago, buy sneakers, he just launched today
the watch, $100,000 watch,
$100,000 watch, right? All of that money that he's talking to his supporters goes to him, not to the campaign and not to the Republican Party. He is siphoning off money.
Yeah, buy the watches, guys. Buy the watches.
Yeah, right. That he needs to make his election competitive because we're crushing him in money. Kamala raised 4 times what he raised in August, which has never happened before in modern American history. One party outraised the other one by so much. So he's struggling to keep up. He's not keeping up. And his response to this is to accelerate all these grifts where he can milk. And it's almost, and the question that I raised today on Twitter and that got a lot of pickup is, is he decided he's going to lose and that he's now, milking, going full grifty, right? The fraudster that he is, to try to milk as much out of this to help pay his legal bills and everything else. because he's realized that this running for president grift is coming to its end, and he's going to need to support himself. And the foreign governments are going to want to, they're not as going to be interested in putting money into him and Jared Kushner's funds. And because it's maniacal, right? Like just in the last 2 weeks, it's been coins, watches, cryptocurrency. He has his ongoing stock, right? Where most of the people who invested in that have lost
Still
huge
tanking.
amounts of money. Yeah, huge amounts of money. There was a fourth, though, thing. He also just flew out to California to do an event at his golf course in California. He's been doing tons of events at
which was
Mar-a-Lago.
basically a tourism spot for his course.
Yeah, it was literally, he went out and did a commercial. He did a national media hit to showcase his golf course, right? And it's like there comes a point. His daughter is like trying to launch her singing career while she's the co-chair of the RNC. And I think we have to realize that for Donald Trump, this was always a business, right? And that winning the presidency was essentially secondary, and that he wanted to also this time run not only to make another couple $100 million, and he made a couple $100 million in contesting the election last time, so he's going to do it again this time. But it's also, he needed to use the power of him being the head of the Republican Party to try to make all his legal problems go away, which he's been reasonably successful at, right? I'm not saying this, he's been successful because we don't know yet. But I think those things were important to him, making lots of money and making the legal problems go away. If he could also become president again, hey, that's cool. But it is incredible. It's incredible to me, just the ugliness of him, and frankly, the grace and beauty and excellence and preparedness and kicking ass of our candidate. And it's just been the contrast, as you pointed, is the key. And the campaign wanted that contrast of the debate. They got it, and it changed the whole election.
Simon, I think that's a great place for us to end today. Anywhere else where our listeners can find you besides hopiumchronicles.com?
Yeah, I spend my time. I have a YouTube channel, and I also spend way too much time on Twitter. Who knows how long that will keep going on at Simon WDC. And I'm also doing a new a series called Closing Strong with Tara McGowan at Courier News that we get together once a week. And this week's episode is we've interviewed Julie Rodriguez, the campaign manager of the campaign, and also Ben Wickler, the Wisconsin State Chair. Wonderful interviews that you can get on their YouTube channel. You also can come to Hopium and find them. That's been a lot of fun too. So, I've been telling everybody, and what did Governor Walz say, right? That we got to leave it all in the playing field. We'll sleep when we're dead. Well, I'm doing the same thing. I'm working 7 days a week at Hopium to the election, and I'm doing as many of these kinds of conversations as I can, because I am deeply optimistic about what we can do. We are winning the election, but now we have to go win it together.
Well, thanks, Simon, for coming on. Thanks, everyone, for listening today to That Trippi Show minus Joe Trippi. He will be back next week, we promise. Like we said, we'll include a link to Simon's work in the show notes. And don't forget, if you are sick of the Twitter stuff, come check out Says Us. Go check them out at says.us and help take back the town square. This podcast will always be free with support from our advertisers. It's part of Resolute Square. You can check out the latest at resolutesquare.com/Trippi. And we'd always appreciate it if you could leave a review and subscribe to That Trippi Show on Apple or wherever you listen. See you next week.
Resolute Square.